Welcome to the LDS Church Podcast, where we talk about topics that help us grow in our affection towards Jesus and also grow more equipped to follow him in the ways that he's leading us. I'm Dan Franklin, and today what I want to talk about is a Christian response to cancel culture. Now, in case you don't know what cancel culture refers to, it refers to this phenomenon that's going on in our culture right now where typically celebrities or somebody in the limelight will say something, usually on social media, whether it's a joke or something ugly or stupid or offensive, and then they'll find themselves being canceled in some way. And the most prominent example of this in recent months was Roseanne Barr, who I never watched the old Roseanne show or the new Roseanne show, but she had this massive show, and then it got rebooted, and it was just a huge cultural phenomenon. It was a #1 show and was bringing in a lot of viewers and a lot of money. And then Roseanne Barr went on Twitter and made an incredibly horrific tweet. Now, I'll just say, for full disclosure, a lot of times when I see headlines that say that somebody said something racist, I've become, sadly, a little bit skeptical because the way that some people define racist comments, I don't think is actually racist all the time. And so I saw the headlines, thought, all right, what really went on here? And then I read the tweet and thought, holy smokes, this, if anything, is racist. I don't know, maybe there's some wild, different interpretation of what she tweeted about this woman, Valerie Jarrett, but it was just a horrible, ugly, and almost certainly racist thing that she tweeted. And just like clockwork, immediately ABC canceled her show. Now, I think what shocked most people about this was not that there would be blowback for her saying something incredibly offensive and ugly, and again, probably racist, but that it happened so quickly that you could have a case where somebody is on the top of the heap, has a #1 show, and then after one tweet, suddenly nothing, just canceled, you're out, you're radioactive, all of your co-stars are looking to distance themselves from you. It was a shocking thing. And for me, I'll say there is a little part of me that feels some compassion and feels a little bit bad for Roseanne on this. And at the same time, I don't feel that terrible about it because the way this played out is pretty straightforward. She had a successful show. She said something horrible. She suffered the consequences for it. She was judged for it. She no longer has a show. So maybe an overreaction, but maybe not. It's just kind of a direct consequences for their actions. What troubles me more about this whole concept of cancel culture is that it often involves people digging through past things that people have said and then bringing those to light and holding them accountable for those. So a couple cases in case you follow what's going on in the news. James Gunn, who directed the first 2 Guardians of the Galaxy movies for Marvel, and then was currently working on the third. People had dug up 10-year-old tweets that he had made, ugly, bad jokes, inappropriate stuff. Turns out this is actually stuff that not only he has publicly addressed several times, but he has apologized for, disavowed, talked about how he's a different person. Nonetheless, these things were dug up, brought into the public view, and he was fired by Disney from Guardians of the Galaxy 3. On top of that, and I know about this because I'm a baseball fan, just within the last month, there are 2 different pitchers, a guy named Josh Hader, who pitches for the Milwaukee Brewers, and a guy named Sean Newcomb, who pitches for the Atlanta Braves. And both of them, within the course of just about 3 weeks, had old tweets of them dug up where they were saying really stupid things. Both these guys are in their mid-20s, and these tweets were from when they were 17, 18, 19 years old. To me, seeing things like that is much more troubling. It has much more of the sense of not, well, you said something yesterday and we're going to figure out how to deal with it today, but you said something 10 years ago and now we're going to figure out what it means and what the consequences are going to be and what price you need to pay right now. Now, here's the deal. Some of you might be listening to this and thinking, all right, this is a Christian podcast. The gospel is at the center of this. Jesus is what we're supposed to be talking about. Why should we care about this phenomenon? Why do we have to have an opinion about cancel culture? And for me, the reason I want to talk about it is because I think it gives a unique insight into something going on in our culture. And those of us who are believers get to hold up the gospel of Jesus and say, how does the gospel of Jesus inform us and lead us on something like this? Because on the one hand, we might be tempted to say, hey, this is just, the chicken's coming home to roost. This is just the whole idea that we have to pay consequences for our actions, and it's good when people are held accountable. So we might be tempted to say that, or we might be tempted on the other hand to say, hey, nobody should judge. This is horrible. Nobody should be judged by their words. Neither of those are quite right. So what I want to do is I want to walk through 3 suggestions of takeaways that we can have when we look at this whole concept of cancel culture that's going on around us. So number 1, real simple, be wise with your words. This is something that we need to take to heart. This is a biblical concept through and through, to be wise with what we say. Now, obviously, if we're worried about the whole concept of our words being thrown around, some of you might be thinking that that's inappropriate, it just shouldn't happen. It shouldn't happen that people are digging up 10-year-old tweets. It shouldn't happen that people are finding old videos of somebody ranting about something. That just shouldn't happen. People should be left alone. I'd say that's fine. You can have that opinion. But having the opinion that it shouldn't happen doesn't change the fact that we all face the reality that it could happen to us. I would be sort of like if you're out with a whole bunch of friends and there was somebody that was there that was sort of a friend of a friend, and he was a real big guy and kind of a guy with a short temper, and your friend just turned to you and said, you know what, just don't bring up the Dodgers. He hates the Dodgers. Dan, I know you're a Dodger fan, just don't bring up the Dodgers or he may explode and he may get violent. Now, I would look at that and say, that is ridiculous that just somebody talking about the Dodgers is going to set this guy off. And then you know what I would do? I wouldn't talk about the Dodgers. I mean, it's just silly. It's just not worth it. I can say it's ridiculous that he's going to get violent, but if he's going to get violent, I'm going to take that reality into consideration. And unless I'm being asked to do something that's really going to compromise my convictions in a deep way, I'm just not going to put myself in a position where I can experience those consequences. So this is just wise for all of us to say, you know what? We live in an age where a lot more stuff is recorded on camera. A lot more stuff is caught either with other people saying our words or with us just in foolish moments putting our words out there for people to consume. So we've got to start with the whole concept of we just need to be wise with what we say. And this is something that's also important, especially for any of us who are parents or for any of us that have influence into younger people, to say this is something that you need to think about. You need to think about what it looks like to be wise with what you say and not just to mouth off anytime you have an idea. The words that we say are clearly important. This is a gospel concept. That while our words are things that can express great hope to people and can communicate the gospel and can speak truth into difficult situations and can speak encouragement to people who are hurting, we also can bring great destruction to ourselves and to others through our words. In Proverbs 18:21, Solomon talks about the whole idea that the power of life and death is in the tongue. And Jesus in Matthew chapter 12, verse 36, talks about the whole idea that there's no careless word that we've said that we won't be held accountable for. Maybe when we think about this whole idea and say, well, it's just not right that people's words would be thrown in their faces, we can say, you know what, ultimately all of our words are things that we'll answer for. So if we're going to work backwards with this, we might think about it this way. All right, here's my starting point. I don't want to say something stupid and ugly on Twitter that will lead to great consequences in my life. And so then I want to work backwards and say, well, the best way not to do that is that I wouldn't be saying those things in general. I wouldn't be saying stupid and ugly things when I'm not on Twitter, but when I'm just with a whole bunch of people. And then if I'm going to work backwards from that and say, well, if I want to be the kind of person that's not consistently saying stupid and ugly things, then I've got to think about what's going on in my heart. I don't want my heart to be generating things that would end up being stupid and ugly and things that I would regret. And this is where this all comes back to our relationship with God. One of the most powerful things that I find in the book of 1 John is when John is talking about love. And he talks in chapter 4 about how God is love. And then he says, anyone who loves is born of God. He says, we love because God first loved us. And he's not simply saying we love God because he first loved us, or anyone who loves God is born of God. He's saying the reason we have the capacity to love others, it is directly tied to how much we are experiencing the love of God in our lives. When Jesus says, love your enemies, some of us could think, how is that possible? That's possible if we are living and soaking up the reality of God's deep love for us. And when we are filled with the love that God has given us, we are much less likely to have ugly things come out of our mouths. And if we're much less likely to have ugly things come out of our mouths, we're much less likely to say something ugly on camera or on Twitter or on any kind of social media that's going to end up coming back to bite us. Just as a little bonus point on this, and I've talked about this before, but I'm going to say it again. I think social media is a really bad place to just rant your ideas. If you need to rant, here's what you need. You need 2 to 3 friends in your life. Not Facebook friends, just actual friends. That when you're feeling like you just need to kind of go on about something or you're deeply frustrated, you can say it to your friends and they can help ground you back to reality. You don't need to express it to the world. It's probably going to come back to bite you. So number 1, real simple, just be wise with your words. Number 2, and this is the one that I might feel most strongly about. Number 2 is to beware of malice. Now, to me, one of the things when we're talking about the cases of cancel culture where things are being dug up from people in their past, one of the things that I tend to ask is, why now? Why after all these years are these things coming up? And in the most recent case, just as I'm recording this on a Tuesday, just this past Sunday, my favorite team, the Dodgers, were almost no-hit by a guy named Sean Newcomb, who's a pitcher for the Braves. Not a great pitcher, not a super famous pitcher, but was 1 strike away from a no-hitter. It was a big deal. He lost the no-hitter in the end. But it was the pitching performance of his life. He was going to be the flavor of the week, just the interview that everybody wanted because he had this great pitching performance. And that same afternoon, a whole bunch of old tweets came up from when he was 18, 19 years old. I'm saying things that were ugly and stupid at the very least, maybe bigoted in some ways. And to me, it's not a matter of saying, should he have said these things when he was a young man? Of course he shouldn't have. But it was a matter of looking at it and saying, why now? Why has this suddenly come out at this moment? And it's hard not to conclude that the reason it came out right at this moment was because this was when he was at the height of his fame. This is when he had finally had his big moment. And people decided it was time to bring him down a peg. That is malice. Malice is when we take joy in the unfortunate circumstances of somebody else. And that's what I believe is going on a lot of times with this cancel culture. It's one thing if you look at a case and you say, all right, Harvey Weinstein almost certainly was preying on women, was behaving terribly, was committing all kinds of crimes. And if we celebrate just the justice of him experiencing consequences, and also if we celebrate the idea that now that this stuff is out, he's much less likely to be a predator. It's one thing to celebrate that's something worth saying. That's a good thing that happened. It's another thing to look at your political opponent or somebody that you don't really like or somebody that you work with who really annoys you and to celebrate in some way their downfall. And the deal is we all have the potential for this. This starts when we're kids. If you think back to when you were younger, you'll probably remember feeling threatened by another person and then looking for ways that you could bring them down a peg. Like I remember in high school, I played water polo all 4 years, and going into my junior year, me and all my friends, we were going to be on varsity. We'd been aspiring to this and looking for this, and I felt pretty good about my place on the team, that I was going to have a good, solid starting place. And then another kid transferred over to our team, and there was buzz about him, that he was good, that he was going to crack the starting lineup. And I'm not going to lie. Every time he messed up in practice, there was a part of me that internally celebrated. I wanted him brought down a peg. I was experiencing envy. I was having malicious thoughts towards him because he was somehow a threat to me. I think we have something inside of us, especially when we look at celebrities or when we look at people who are famous, and we start to think, why are they famous? Why are they famous and not me? Why are they getting all this attention and I'm not? And we get some kind of internal glee, or at least we feel better about ourselves in being able to find out the dirt on another person. One of the passages that Paul brings up in Colossians chapter 3 is he talks about ridding ourselves of all malice. Malice is something that is horrifically contradictory to the gospel. If we are filled with the love of Jesus, then we're reaching out for hoping to do good into the lives of others. We are rooting for their successes. We're rooting for them to experience the grace of God in their lives. We're looking to bless our enemies. Rid yourself of malice. And the way that you rid yourself of malice is, once again, you've got to be so secure in your relationship with God that you don't look at other people as some sort of threat to your status in the world. So number one, with cancel culture, just be wise with your words. Number two, beware of malice. And number three, believe in redemption. Now, I'll return to some of the things I talked about earlier. So let's just take this picture that I mentioned. Sean Newcomb, so this 25-year-old guy, has this great pitching performance, has all these old tweets come out, and then immediately is confronted with this. And one of the, I shouldn't say funny, one of the, to me, ironic things that happened is immediately Major League Baseball was talking about sending him to sensitivity training. And I just wanted to say the best way to send him to sensitivity training is if you had a time machine. If you could go back 7 years and find 18-year-old Sean Newcomb and say, hey, you shouldn't say these ugly, stupid things, we're going to give you some sensitivity training. But I just thought, why would we assume that 25-year-old Sean Newcomb is exactly the same as 18-year-old Sean Newcomb? When we practice this, we betray the idea that we think that the words that people have said constitute the most true and the unchanging nature that they hold within them. And the fact is, as believers in Jesus, above all, we should believe in change and transformation and redemption. That this is the core of the gospel, that Jesus came to die for sinners. And then when he dies for us, he transforms us by the power of the Holy Spirit. We believe that people who once walked in darkness can now walk in light. And just think for a second, not even to some of the minor characters in the Bible, but to some of the great heroes in the Bible. Peter denied that he even knew Jesus. And was that the final word on him? No. Peter ended up being the rock upon which Jesus built his church. The Apostle Paul was violently attacking and imprisoning Christians, and that was not the final word on him, because God did something profound in his life, and he ended up writing almost half the books of the New Testament. Think back to the Old Testament with David. And of course, David's horrific fall with adultery and then setting up Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, to be killed on the battlefield. These were horrible things. But just pause and say, when you think of King David, is that the epithet? Is that the final word on him? And the answer for most of us is no. That was a horrible thing that he did, but the final word on him was that he was the greatest king of Israel and deeply used by God, and a man who deeply loved God. When we do this cancel culture, when we look to dig up things that people have said in the past and therefore judge them solely on those words, we betray that we don't really believe in the idea of redemption. We don't really believe in the idea of growth. And the fact is, if you find yourself in a position where you have old words of yours or an old video of yours thrown in your face, we absolutely should take responsibility for our actions. We should say, you know what, I did that, or you know what, I said that, and it was wrong, and it was ugly, and I wouldn't say that today, and God has done a great work in my life. We can own what we've done. This is part of what it means that Jesus came to die for sinners. It means that our status before God, and even before other people to some extent, doesn't depend on the idea that we haven't messed up. And so if you think about this and just say, oh, well, then how then do we treat people that have a checkered past? And I'd say, well, first of all, we've got to have the humility to look at it and say, to some extent, we all have a checkered past. We all have things that we regret. We all have things that we're ashamed of or that we would be ashamed of if more people knew about. And I've said this before, but man, I'm thankful that social media wasn't a thing when I was 18 years old. I'd like to believe I wouldn't have said anything that would be embarrassing, but what are the chances? We need to have the humility to say we all have a checkered past. And some of the people that we run across are going to have a checkered past that we're okay with. We say, all right, well, you said some stupid things or you did some dumb things, but I'm all right with it. And sometimes we're going to run across people that have things that are a bit more harsh. You know, it's one thing if you look at somebody and you say, all right, one time when you were 15 years old, your girlfriend broke up with you, and then you tweeted, all girls are dumb. all right, most people are going to be able to get over that. They're going to say, all right, you were a stupid kid and you made a stupid comment and it wasn't even that serious. But just imagine for a second, let's say that somebody is that same age, is that 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, and was watching the riots that were happening in Ferguson, Missouri a couple years ago. And that person ignorantly just went on Twitter and said, "What's with black people?" Is that somebody who's redeemable? That's not a good comment. That's a bad comment. Is that somebody that we're willing to look at and say, you did something stupid, you said something stupid, but you know what? We believe in a God who raises the dead. We believe in a God who brings light out of darkness, who brings beauty out of ruins. So we get to own our sin and own our failures, and at the same time believe that God can work great redemption in us and great redemption in others. Well, I hope that as you thought about this and as you've listened to this, you found this helpful in some way. Just to go through them again, as we look at this whole concept of cancel culture, my advice, gospel suggestions are: be wise with your words, beware of malice, and believe in redemption. And if you have feedbacks or comments or disagreements or questions or anything like that, you can just go on our website, lbf.church, and you can click on the little tab that says blog and podcast, and you'll find the video of this podcast episode and also of past ones. And you can just go on the site there and you can leave your comment, leave your question. I always love interacting with people who have thoughts or even have disagreements on things that we talk about in these episodes. Also, you can just get the podcast every week. You can subscribe to it, the LBF Church Podcast. We'd love for that also. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen. Until next time, I'm Dan Franklin, and this is the LBF Church Podcast.